In the spring of 1453, Constantinople fell. The city that had stood for 1,000 years, the hinge between Europe and Asia, the gateway through which silk and spices and ideas had flowed for centuries, passed into Ottoman hands. And within weeks, something happened in the markets of Venice and Genoa and Lisbon that no army had caused. The price of pepper doubled. Then it doubled again. Not because the pepper had changed, not because there was less of it in the world, but because the road that brought it to Europe had just acquired a new gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper intended to be paid. This is a story about who controls the road, because whoever controls the road controls everything that moves along it. And that lesson, learned in blood and spice and desperation in the 15th century, is being relearned right now, in shipping containers and semiconductor factories and trade war negotiations in 2026. For most of human history, the Silk Road was not one road. It was a web of routes, some overland, some maritime, connecting China and Central Asia and Persia and the Arab world, and ultimately Europe. Along those routes moved silk, obviously, but also spices from the Spice Islands, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cotton from India, porcelain, glass, ideas, religions, plagues. The trade made cities fabulously wealthy. Constantinople sat at the western end of the land routes, and for centuries it extracted tolls and taxes from every merchant who passed through. Venice and Genoa grew rich as the European distributors of what came through. The system worked because everyone along the chain was taking a cut, and everyone along the chain had an interest in keeping the goods moving. Then came Mehmed II. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 did not immediately close the Silk Road. That is a myth. Trade continued. But it continued on Ottoman terms, with Ottoman taxes, through Ottoman-controlled territory. The Venetians, who had grown comfortable with their privileged access, found their position dramatically weakened. The spices kept coming, but the cost of moving them rose. And in the markets of Europe, prices reflected that new reality. The response was not passive acceptance. It was panic, followed by ingenuity. Portugal had been quietly working on an alternative for decades. If the eastern land routes were controlled by the Ottomans, perhaps there was a sea route around Africa. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope. A decade later, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea. The monopoly on the land routes had been broken, not by defeating the gatekeeper, but by building a new road entirely. And here is the lesson that the 15th century embedded permanently into the logic of global trade. Control of a route is not permanent. It is only as durable as the absence of alternatives. The moment a cheaper, safer, or faster alternative exists, the gatekeeper loses its power. Now look at 2026. The world that built itself after 1945 was organized around a simple premise, that the free movement of goods across borders was good for everyone, and that global supply chains, stretching from raw materials in one country to factories in another, to consumers in a third, were the engine of shared prosperity. That premise is cracking. China controls the majority of the world's rare earth processing, the materials essential for electric vehicles, semiconductors, and military hardware. Taiwan manufactures the most advanced chips. The Panama Canal is a choke point for a significant fraction of global maritime trade. The Strait of Hormuz controls a third of the world's liquefied natural gas. These are the new Constantinopolitan straits, the narrow passes through which the modern economy flows. And the countries that control those passes have learned from history. They know what a gatekeeper can extract. The question facing every other nation is the same one that faced Venice in 1453. Pay the toll, find an alternative route, or go without. The answer being given in 2026 by the United States, by Europe, by China, by everyone simultaneously, is to build alternative routes, to reshore manufacturing, to diversify supply chains, to accept the higher costs of not being dependent on a single gatekeeper. This is not globalization ending. It is globalization being renegotiated. The Silk Road did not disappear after 1453. It was rerouted. The spices still arrived in Europe. They just came around Africa instead of through Constantinople. The trade still happened. It just happened on different terms, with different winners and losers. The 15th century took 50 years to reroute. The question facing the 21st century is how long this rerouting will take, and who will be standing at the new passes when it is done. I'm Pecunia historian. The history of money is the history of everything.